This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christy Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
In this episode, we're doing something a little different. We're using a book as a lens, and not just any book. Strangers, the memoir by Belle Burden that started as a New York Times modern love essay in 2023 and has become the literary sensation of this season. It's the story of a woman whose husband of 20 years walked out in the middle of the COVID lockdown with no warning, little explanation. She's the granddaughter of legendary socialite Babe Paley, daughter of New York icon Amanda Burden, and Belle had every advantage. And she was still blindsided, left to put her life and finances back together. But when Belle told the story of her marriage and divorce, she was also documenting financial and legal mistakes a woman can make, especially when she's in love. Lisa Zeiderman is a managing partner at Miller Zeiderman LLP, an attorney, a certified financial litigator, and a certified divorce financial analyst. And she read Strangers. Let's just say she had notes. Lisa's going to walk us through what Belle got wrong, how to protect yourself, why it matters, and what you should know so you never find yourself in Belle's position. Welcome to The Balanced Dilemma, Lisa.
Thanks
We're so glad to
much,
have you.
Maura. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so
Great.
excited to have this backdrop. Now, Lisa, according to Belle Burden's account, some of her decisions put her at real financial risk of losing her major assets, particularly their home that was purchased with her inheritance previously held in trust before the purchase. And it all started at the beginning of their relationship. Tell us about that, Lisa. What did that signal to you?
Sure. So at the very beginning of their relationship, when they were about to get married, they were entering into a prenuptial agreement. And interestingly, Belle had already contracted with her mother, as did her brother, to have a prenuptial agreement. So prenuptial agreements were not uncommon. They must have been spoken about in the family for years because it seemed like there was a generic prenuptial agreement that would cycle through the family like many families have. And at the very last minute, or very close to the last minute, her husband, named James in the book, actually approached Belle and said, "I'd like to change the prenuptial agreement." And the change was very significant for Belle because what it basically did was all of the income that James was earning during the marriage would become James. And all of the items that were put, all the real property or accounts that were put into joint names would be marital. And of course, people would have their separate property, but if they put it into a joint name, they were going to lose their separate property and their inheritance. And Belle, against the advice of her attorney, made the decision to put this change into the prenuptial agreement. And I think this was the unfortunate downfall of why she lost so much in terms of her assets as she went through.
Do you think she realized what was going to happen at the time?
So I think she realized that this was definitely a change. I think she was warned not to do it. I don't think she had thought it through thoroughly because I don't think that I don't know if you can envision what it's going to be like when all the money that your husband earns is going into his account and is going to be his separate property for 20 years, right? For 20 years worth of income. And if you're not working, you're not going to have any of that. And it may have been that she thought there was more of an inheritance and she was more financially secure than she might have actually been. So I think it was a combination, but was it well thought out? I don't think that it was well thought out. And I don't think there was time to think it out because
Right, they signed it 6 days before the wedding.
Exactly. It was a good strategy. If that's what he did, it was a brilliant strategy on his part. Of course, it's not presented that way as a strategy, but given some of the other dynamics in their relationship, it might have been just a good strategy.
Did you think it was a red flag?
So for me, it was a red flag, but it was a bigger red flag that she agreed. And that was the part that was really disconcerting, that she had the ability to get the legal advice. She had the funding to get the legal advice. And yet she decided to overlook it because she was madly in love with James.
And the
There was
thing is
something
that Go ahead, Christy.
Dickensian in maybe the tawdriness of earned income, like his income from his job. Oh, that, I've got a trust fund. Those are real assets.
Right. And that may have been her thought process. She may not have thought that her husband was going to, go on and be part of this hedge fund. And they were both earning at about the same level at the time. They were both at Davis Polk, right? So I don't know that there was a complete thought process. I'm sure she was very excited about getting married to him. And so, like many people, they overlook certain flaws when they're about to get married and when they're excited to get married.
One of the things I've seen before is people put in, even when they have this provision, sort of a burn-off period. Or after a period of time, we've been married 5 years, 10 years, this provision no longer applies. Or after we have children. I was a little surprised personally that there was nothing like that in it. You?
Well, I wasn't that surprised about that. We draft a lot of prenuptial agreements without that burn off, the sunset clause. Many of the prenuptial agreements that we draft are people actually who come to us whose parents have gone through these very litigious divorces, and they do not want to have the divorce that their parents had. And so the prenuptial agreement is very important, and they do want to keep their assets completely separate. The problem wasn't that they kept their assets separate. The problem was, I think, that there wasn't the thought of what was going to happen now that we are keeping his assets separate, right? And I didn't keep my own assets separate. I actually contributed them or shared them with him. And so it was a double whammy, essentially.
Yeah. It was total double standard. It really wasn't fair. She did one thing, he did another.
Exactly.
Right. And it's not just, I think we should point out, this isn't just an issue for the uber wealthy like her family was.
No, this is an issue that I think many women confront where they have ceded control of their finances to their spouse. And if you watch, if you read all the way through the book, there were many opportunities for her to take back that control, but because she was so much in love with James, and because she felt that he was protecting her, and because they were building this family of 3 children, and they had this most fabulous life, right? A house in the vineyard, the apartment in the city, this very cozy, wonderful life, she overlooked it. So for example, I think, and Christy and I even talked about this before we got on, what was so striking to me was she was given the opportunity to get a job that she really wanted later on, right? After the prenup is signed, after the money, I think monies were contributed, or at least some of the monies were contributed. And she went to James and she said, "I'd really like to take this job." And he said, you don't need to take that job. Don't take that job. I'm going to take care of us. Don't worry. And she felt protected by that in one sense, maybe a little disappointed that she didn't take the job, but that was her opportunity, I think, to negotiate or renegotiate what she had already negotiated, right? So when these transitional occurrences happen in a marriage, and when you've maybe made some mistakes or overlooked what the prenuptial has said or want to make a change, these opportunities are negotiating opportunities to make yourself a better deal. And I think she didn't think she needed to make a better deal because she felt James would protect her.
She laid a lot of blame at his feet, but she was part of a culture, not just a marriage, but a culture where she was following the rules. And I mean, that's how I read it.
I didn't see it as a culture. This is a woman who was very educated, right?
We should point out she was a lawyer too.
Right. She was a lawyer. She and he started in the same place, right? They both started at Davis Polk. They both had the same opportunity. And, I often see people who have started out on an even playing field. And then one of them decides, usually the wife, right, to stay home and take care of the children and be the nurturer. And the other person decides to go out and he's going to be the earner. And I say he because that's traditionally what happens. And then this happens, right? Somebody walks out the door or it doesn't work. And I think that it's not that was the culture, because it's not so long ago, right? We were in the pandemic and she was in a 20-year marriage at that point, and women had careers, and she was a lawyer, and she certainly could have become probably partner, Davis Polk or wherever she wanted to be. It wasn't really the culture. I think it was more that she was very much loving her life, her marriage, her James, the children, the time in the vineyard, all of it. It was her life.
Well, she also didn't want to be the child with no one to pick her up and living with the nanny. So she made a very concerted decision to give her children the life that she did not have, which was a working mother who was very high profile. Although she says very loving things about her mother, it clearly was a world she didn't want her children stigmatized by.
100%. She talks about the chocolate chip cookies, about wanting to be at the school to give them the chocolate chip cookies. And even at the end, right, of the book, she talks about the love and about what type of life has she shown them. And I think that was very much a part of her, is that she wanted to be a good example for them, and she felt that that was the way to be a good example.
So let's get back to some legal stuff, which is renegotiating a prenup, creating a postnup, which Christine, I would like to learn more about. What are the entry points? Why should you do it? And when should you do it? And should we all do it?
Right. So I think that a lot more people are coming to us for postnuptial agreements. I think when there is a change, so for example, I think women who have decided that they're going to have children and stay home, that's a transitional change to me. And that is a time that they should be negotiating a postnuptial agreement if they're married. And certainly, if that is the thought process, that that's what they want to do before they get married, then that should be a conversation to be having upfront with your fiance, and to negotiate a prenuptial agreement that will protect you in the event that you do actually stay home and are not working. I think that's very, very important. So I would say that's one point. I think if there's a large inheritance that one party gets, that might be another time to renegotiate the prenuptial or to enter into a postnuptial agreement. There may be far less assets in the marriage, and if there's a large inheritance and that person intends on keeping that large inheritance for himself or herself, then I think that that could be a good place to renegotiate the distribution of assets or to figure out the alimony package. I think that those are two very good points. When you buy property, in her case, they bought it in joint names, both properties.
Can you just break that down a little so that people who are listening understand that she used her money that was supposed to stay with her? Just explain that.
So she had a trust, maybe more than one trust. And the way that it would have worked, according to the prenup, even according to the prenuptial agreement as changed by James, she would have maintained that as her sole and separate property if she left it in the trust, or if she bought property in her own name. That's how the actual prenuptial agreement, according to the book, read. Right. So if it was an inheritance and it was her separate property, it was hers. If it was earnings that she earned, it would have been hers. Right. She would have just put it into an account or an investment or whatever it is. It would have been hers. And the same for James. Right. So James, any earnings for James, any inheritance for James that he kept in his separate name, he would receive. Unfortunately, what she did was she took her inheritance, her trust monies, and she put that money into the two properties. And then she agreed to put those two properties in joint names between she and James. And unlike the law, which would have given her what is called a separate property claim, because of the way that the prenuptial agreement read, that trust money that she put in the Vineyard property and in the New York property became marital property to be divided 50-50. So had she not put it in joint names, it would have been a non-event. And frankly, if she didn't have the prenup in that case, it would have been a non-event as well.
And there were so many other options here. I mean, let's talk practically. When you're married and it's a home, you do want it to be a family asset and a feeling, not that it's one person's. But there were other avenues she could have pursued. Let's say it was in her name, but he was given a life estate or something like that, where he wouldn't feel disenfranchised. And it seemed like there was no advice given. And there was no pushback on the release of the money, which you and I discussed beforehand. Who was there in Belle's camp to protect her, or did she just ignore all the advice entirely?
Right. And she says she ignored advice. I mean, at the end, she said she goes through her list of the things that she could have done differently, to her credit. And she said she did ignore the advice of her lawyer. I don't know if the trustees had a copy of the prenuptial agreement, if they actually weighed in on this, who the trustees actually were. I don't remember if the book said who the trustees were, but if they actually said, we're not releasing this money Okay, we're the trustees and we're not releasing the money. Maybe they had that right. Maybe they did not. Okay. So who you pick as your trustee for your children's inheritance, it's definitely an important point, right?
Interesting.
I thought perhaps they would have said, yes, here's the money, but the homes go in your name.
Correct.
And they could have said that, right? But once the money is out of the account, I'm going to say this, you lose control, right? Once the money leaves that trust, you've lost the control as the trustee. So once they give it, even if they had done that, I don't think that that would have solved the problem, because if James was determined to
Right.
have that money, that first house could have been sold, and then they would have bought the second house. And by that time, the trustees were long out of the picture with that money, and it could have been put in joint names. So I think the thing that should have happened is there would have been could have been in both names, by the way, Christy, and there just could have been an addendum of some sort or a modification or another writing that said that notwithstanding that we are placing this in joint names, that Belle has placed her separate property in this and that she will receive a credit off the top of such and such, and perhaps even the appreciation of that.
And this is not a law show. We are talking about a great book, but there's things that could have been done that weren't. And I did want to ask you one question. We're talking about money and how it factors into a marriage that reaches dissolution. But a postnup can also be used for other motivating factors, like a spouse who might have an issue and it's going on a path and you need some incentives to keep that spouse, maybe going to therapy or something like that. I've heard it used for all different reasons, not just money in the bank. And it's things that people should explore for the health of their marriage. It's not something that always means the end of a marriage. It could mean something that keeps it stronger and on course to protect everyone.
Yes, it can really, as the words say in most postnups, enhance the marriage, right? So if the issue in your marriage is about finance, you can put those issues to rest with a postnuptial agreement, right? So if
Right.
one of you is earning, if there's a huge disparity, for example, in earnings, which sometimes we see, and there's resentment about that disparity in earnings, there can be a postnuptial agreement to address the disparity in earnings. And maybe there's a different division of how the assets are divided. There's a lot of things you could do. I think that it's certainly something that people don't consider. And keeping in mind that not every state recognizes postnuptial agreements, but New York does for sure.
What do you recommend? How do you recommend couples handle money? Do you suggest that they commingle? Do they keep it separate? I mean, even if you don't commingle, isn't it all absent a prenuptial agreement? Otherwise, isn't it all one big pot?
No, it's not all one big pot. You have premarital property, right? Monies that you come into the
Right.
marriage with, which you can keep separate and apart.
I meant
You-
during the marriage,
So
the money that comes
So
in
the money
during.
so if there's no prenuptial agreement and no postnuptial agreement, then the monies that are earned during the marriage would be marital. And no matter whose name they are in, they would be marital, whether they're in joint names or they're in one person's name. So, if, as you know, 401ks, for example, are only able to be in one person's name, but that doesn't mean that the non-titled spouse, the other spouse, doesn't get a portion of those 401k monies, usually in a divorce. So that
And pensions and those things. Yeah.
Yes, all of those things, right? So, and that goes for anything. Very often we see that the earner is controlling the money. Not always, by the way, but we see that the person who's earning is controlling the money and the other person is shut out. But that doesn't mean that the other person can't actually have the benefit of those funds in a divorce.
And Social Security. This is an issue for me and Maura that we always think about, and it's also something that people feel it's below them to talk about Social Security. Women turning 65 are the largest number of in poverty because many of them did not have their own earned income and got divorced, and then didn't deal with the dispersing of the Social Security or working that out.
So you don't need to disperse it in the agreement, just so we're clear. You have a right, if you've been married for 10 years, to half of the Social Security earnings that your spouse has. And your spouse, and I love this, I think this is the reason that Social Security is having all these issues as far as I'm concerned. Even if if you're divorced, it's almost like a perk. You get half and your spouse gets 100%.
Hmm.
So I don't understand it to this day, but that's the law, actually. If I were if you were to get divorced, then you get and you haven't worked, you will get half of your spouse's Social Security earnings each month, just the way that he does. It will be split up. You will get it, and if you've been married for 10 years, and he will get the whole thing. So
Wow.
1.5 times
You
essentially.
just gave us our soundbite for social media, Lisa. That's a really good one. I like that.
So
So, apart from the legal, Lisa made financial mistakes. Like she kind of closed her eyes and let him handle all the finances.
yes.
Talk about why that's such a big mistake for women.
So I think that there were a lot of things that she closed her eyes to. And that was one of the things, was financial control. I think that there was, so I recall there was something in the book about her not going to the meetings or not dealing with the meetings
And
with
read the tax returns.
right, or looking at the tax returns. Highly sophisticated, highly intelligent woman, well educated, right? A lawyer again, right? And she didn't look at the tax returns. She trusted him. And I think that obviously, to some extent, that trust was misplaced, but I think that happens so often. Women don't, and men don't look at the tax returns closely. We get these calls on April 15th. Okay. It's like, I will say, April 15th is a very busy day. Should I sign the tax return? Well, like, did you just decide today was April 15th and you're telling me about this? Well, I just got the draft. Okay, like, what should I do as your attorney with the draft? An indemnification agreement might have been good. You're going through a divorce so that you're not admitting or denying income. Maybe his income or your income isn't correct. Maybe somebody doesn't want to admit that by signing the tax return that it's correct. Maybe there's things we could do. How is the refund being split? All of those things, right? No thought about this. And she unfortunately was one of those people who didn't look at the tax returns, right? Sometimes there are a lot of pages. Okay.
But
True.
a little
True.
suggestion here. Okay, put a tickler in the calendar. August 15th, set up an appointment with the accountant. Can you walk me through it? Go through page by page. It's daunting. It's terrifying. All those schedules, even people who are handling their finances don't even know what they mean. And it's something everyone should know. And women and men to go through the tax return, but get it out of the tax horror season and go page by page and figure it out and ask questions when you don't feel embarrassed.
Work with a financial advisor. I'm going to say that's the other piece, right? I think that they had a financial advisor, as I remember, and she didn't attend the meetings, and James was attending the meetings. I have to go back through my notes, but I'm pretty sure that that's what
He might
was
have been
happening.
in-house. He was working for a hedge fund.
Yeah, I don't, I somehow I remember this about this, that there was a financial advisor, but in any event, women generally, I'm going to say, often reluctant to attend the meetings, or they don't understand it, or there's shame in terms of asking what you don't know. I think she talked about that issue, right? About shame, about asking the questions when you don't understand. Don't just say yes. Say, what does that mean instead, right? Attend the meetings. It's your life. You should be attending the meetings.
Well, we have Lisa and I discussed a catchphrase here more that we also can
Okay.
use. Jumping off of Sheryl Sandberg's relentlessly pleasant. In the wife scenario, it's relentlessly compliant and not wanting to look like you're annoying or difficult, which is in the category of bossy. And that's why if you can get your own ally, whether financial, legal, whatever, to look at this with you in a non-stressful environment, you can ask the questions that you are afraid are stupid and know what you're doing.
That's interesting. Was you suggesting that on a husband and wife and they're not splitting up, they each have their own financial advisor?
No, I
Okay.
actually think you can share the financial advisor.
Okay.
I just think you have to attend the
Attend.
meetings. I think it would be good enough if you were attending the meetings, right? And asking the questions. I think if you feel unsure, right? Or you feel that that financial advisor is somehow what would I say, too tight, right,
Right.
with your spouse, then that might be the time to get a second opinion, to get your own financial person, to say, we need to switch because this isn't working for me anymore. Here's 3 people that I've interviewed that I'd like you to interview, right? All of those things. But of course, we're not compliant anymore, right?
But having the meeting, and if your spouse turns to you and say, hey, look, I've got 15 minutes here, that's a dumb question. Or do we really need to ask that now? That's really how it's going to go. So even if you're not getting your own person, to set up a meeting one-on-one where you could say to your your joint advisor, joint attorney, joint accountant, whatever it is, just walk me through this like I'm a 4th grader, which is a horrible thing to say, but the stuff is confusing, and understanding your
That's
investments and assets, you have to do it.
And I think to your point, if James is too busy to spend the extra 15 minutes, she could have spent the extra half an hour or hour with the advisor once he went on
True.
to go to work, right? But I think that women get very caught up in being home, taking care of the kids, feeling that they are protected, feeling like this isn't going to happen to them. And so they stop watching, right? And I think that it's the part where you stop watching. I'm not saying you need to be paranoid. I'm not saying that you have to be suspicious. I'm saying you have to keep your eyes open. I mean, you have to pay attention. If somebody is not there to just take care of you, you need to take care of yourself as well,
Well,
right?
this brings up another issue. I know Maura and I can each have done this interview alone because we have so many independent questions, but the splitting of the expenses, what is that about? How many couples do that?
But, years ago, I represented a couple who they literally would, when they would go on a trip and they would stop at the gas station, he would pay in one direction, she would pay in the other direction. You'd be surprised at all the different machinations that people have of splitting expenses. Obviously, if it's from the joint account, then it makes it easier, right? It just all goes into the joint pot and the expenses are paid. But that is not always the case. And I will say in a lot of the prenuptial agreements that we do, there is a splitting of expenses and how expenses are going to be split. Keep in mind again, and I might have said this, I don't know if I said it to you, Christy, before, or if I said this on when we were doing this interview, but I think there are a lot of people who are now grown, who are in their 30s, maybe even in their 40s, who have watched their parents get divorced. And their divorces were very difficult, contentious divorces. And these children lived through custody battles and long court cases, and they remember it going on for years. And I have seen in the last, I would say, year and a half, 2 years, more and more of these people coming to me for prenuptial agreements, and they do want to keep their assets separate, and they do want to figure out how to split their expenses, and they do want to make this very clean and very straightforward because they do not want to have a divorce like that, like their parents. And
Well,
you can understand that.
in the book, there's another money issue that struck me, and I don't know if it struck you, but he required her to annotate the credit card bills.
Yes.
That struck me, and I could be wrong, as very controlling.
Yes.
Red flag, too?
So, yes, although I will say, I mean, my husband and I have an unbelievable relationship, and we both are very, very transparent in terms of finances. I don't think you could get more transparent, but he will give me the credit cards and he will say, just take a look at them and make
Yeah.
sure, right? He's not going to ask me to sit and annotate them, okay? But he will just want to make sure because, he's not watching my spending and I'm not watching his. And he'll say, did all are these correct? Okay. No criticism, no critique, nothing, but are these correct? In her case, he was much more controlling. Look, there's no question. He had he had a very interesting relationship with money. Okay. It
And she
showed
talked
itself.
about that.
Right. It showed itself up in very difficult ways for her. He became more controlling, not unusual, as they went through the divorce for the annotated credit cards, right? That was one of the things that she talked about. And I think she did a good job of talking about the divorce portion of it. And how she felt about it all afterwards also. Christy and I spoke about that also at the end, her
We're going to
feelings
come
about.
back to the end part of
Yeah.
it. There are so many people who are coupled, committed couples with or without children, but aren't married. How do you deal with these issues in that circumstance, and is it different?
So it's definitely different. It's different because there is no equitable distribution if you aren't married, right? So you're not splitting assets unless you contract to split the assets or unless you're actually buying joint property. So if it's not in your name, then it's definitely not yours, right? Or it's just not yours. So if I am living with somebody and I go out and I buy a home and you live in my home for, 10 years, it's still not your home. It's my home. That is a very different thing than being married. It's also, there's no alimony, right? So no spousal support. So you could end up with really no
Nothing.
rights, right? Okay. Because there really are very few rights for people who are not married unless you have some sort of a contract with that other person. So it's entirely different.
And I've
So
seen
we
that work against men as well as women, that
Mhm.
they're together for many years. He might have put money into property, thought they were going to get a share of it, and that's not how it works.
So it's time to get to the divorce. And we should say that she learned he was cheating on her by getting a phone call from the husband of the woman who he
Yes.
was cheating with.
Yes.
He was initially like, it meant nothing. And the next day, it was like a switch went off and he said, I'm done, I'm out.
Yes. And yes.
Now, there's psychologists, I think, have a term called wife abandonment syndrome for it, or so I've read. Many people, readers, were struck like, how can this be? Is it common or uncommon in your practice?
So I think it's pretty common. One person is way ahead in their thinking than the other person. She doesn't talk about that, and obviously we don't have his side of the story, but maybe he
Correct.
was thinking about it for a long time. Who knows? Okay. Maybe he had been thinking about it for years. We will never know that. Okay. He certainly made a good plan for himself in every way, shape, or form. So one has to think that he had some thought about it. But I think that the first thing is that she was shocked, obviously, because he was so way ahead of it, and maybe it just like a light went off for him that morning, that he just wasn't happy, and he was just, this was the time. It was also during the pandemic, right? So it was particularly, I mean spirited, maybe. Okay.
Well,
You
he
know,
could also do it under cover of night. There probably was less social consequences because everything
yeah.
was, held in abeyance. And the thing that shocked all of us, which was the go button with the New York Times as she portrayed it, was the fact that he didn't want custody of the kids.
Yes.
That really spoke to some other issue other than, "Oh, I've fallen out of love with you."
He was done. He had enough. And look, he knew he had enough. And I think that in retrospect, like when you get, and maybe we're not ready for the end. So, but I think he knew he had enough. And I think that there is a gracefulness, I will say this, to knowing when you have enough and leaving rather than torturing everybody through it all. Okay. So maybe it wasn't the best moment to leave, and maybe it wasn't the nicest way to do it. But you also have to think to yourself, well, if he had stayed, what would that have all looked like? All locked up in the house in the vineyard together. Okay. Him unhappy, getting calls from this woman, Belle getting texts from the husband. Okay. What would that have all looked like if all stayed in this pandemic in this home? I'm not really sure that was the best thing. Sometimes leaving is a good idea rather than subjecting everybody to this on an ongoing basis.
So there's
Lisa's
another
giving
thing
James an
that
out.
people keep talking
Oh,
about.
well, no, it's not giving him an out, but
I'm
it
only
is.
teasing.
No, but it's fine. But I will say, I don't know that the torture of staying, okay, for everybody's sake, living the lie is a good thing either, right? Because it doesn't allow anybody to move forward, and it's just essentially continuing this lie, and it's not easy to leave, but sometimes you just have to leave, frankly, because it's not working.
But what about the sandwich?
Oh, the
I
sandwich.
have had this discussion with many, many women, and just as background, when he finally came up to tell the kids with her, reluctantly, he needed to get to leave after, and he asked her to make him a sandwich, and she did. And every woman I know that I spoke to who's been in a long-term marriage would are like, hell no, and not that politely. I
So
spoke to a young man who was like, oh, I totally got that. So
the sandwich. So the sandwich is an interesting thing. Okay. The kids were there. It's very important for us to remember that when he asked for the sandwich, the children were sitting there, and she very much did what she should have done, which was to get up and make the sandwich. There is no question that that's what she should have done. She should not have said, go make your own sandwich. He had just told these children that they were divorcing, that he was leaving. He was still the father and is still the father of these children. And I often remember, and I have a very favorite judge, I won't use his name, in New York, that I really think always is very menschy and also thinks appropriately. And I always think to myself, what would he do in this situation? There's no question the sandwich was the right thing to do. I had been sitting in a courtroom, and he had asked this couple, the woman had ordered Chinese food, and they had had some fight about the Chinese food, and the children were there. And what he wanted to know was, when she ordered the Chinese food, did she ask her ex-husband to be, if he wanted any Chinese food, what would he like? Now, right, that was his question, because, and she looked at him like he was crazy, Okay. And he said, because it was the right thing to do, because you're all in the house, right? And that is the father of your children. And you ask him if he wants the Chinese food because that's the right thing to do. And so I do think making the sandwich was the right thing to do. There's no question in my mind about it.
Funnily enough, though, that was not the reason she gave in the book. She
That she
said,
gave-
she was like, I'm going to make him the best darn sandwich so he won't want to leave.
So she says that after, but there was a part of the book that speaks to the fact that he
Later.
was that he was the children's father. She absolutely says that. And you're right. She does go into the kitchen and then she's having this thought process of, well, should I make a really crummy sandwich? Should I make a really great sandwich? The best sandwich I could make. I'm going to decide to make the best sandwich I could make. Okay. But the first thought when she was sitting there and he asked were her children. And that would have been the time when many women, maybe the women you spoke to, Maura, would have said, no way am I making your sandwich, and really told him off, right? But she didn't do it. She didn't create the scene.
And what might surprise people from someone told me this, that they spoke with some people who were divorced, and it was amazing. There's a lot of things that happen that might surprise people. Some of them still stay in sexual relationships. Some have relationships that with finances and things that they're still giving money to the ex-spouse, even though they're remarried. There's all marriages. That's why we have the privilege to not testify against our spouse. It's a unique relationship, and a lot of people have taken a position with the sandwich, but you can't fault her, and I can understand it, but it certainly hit a nerve.
Interesting.
And one of the things, someone I know, divorced couple, and every Mother's Day, he sent his ex-wife flowers because she was still the mother of his children.
Exactly.
And
Exactly. That is exactly right.
but I want to go back to him not wanting the children, if you don't mind, Christy.
Absolutely.
Because how do you handle that? Can you force him to be with the kids? Can you force the financial responsibility beyond the state statutory minimums?
Do you see that a lot, Lisa?
We see it. We do see it, actually. We've had cases where a parent just doesn't have the interest level to have the children in their lives. We do see it. Sometimes I think it's because the children remind them of their spouse and they just can't deal with that. Sometimes they've moved on and it just doesn't work for their new lives. Yes, we see it. We see it quite a bit. And we also see it the opposite way, where the children don't want to see the parent.
And there was another issue we were discussing. Lisa and I were of the opinion that it reads like Belle is still in love with James. And how many times are parties divorced, but there still is this lingering relationship feelings there. And we did have another guest that was receiving alimony. So there was no incentive to get remarried to nullify receiving the alimony. And to me, that created a tie to something that was not helpful to that person's life. It's better to move on. But when you're getting a chunk of money every month that you cannot replicate on your own, then it's understandable. But how was she able to move on? Do you see instances where the setup in the divorce results in someone still really effectively being part of the relationship that's fallen apart?
So I think that she moved on, right? She wrote the book. By the way, I was shocked that he allowed the book to be written.
Well, that was another set of questions.
Right. So we have to talk about that because
We
that
have
was
to talk
the most
about that.
shocking part of the whole thing.
Yes.
But the fact is, she moved on, and there is that moment in the street when she's downtown with her friend and she's walking and he's across the street, and she doesn't go across the street to say hello to him. He's waving and she just, she waves back or says hello and walks on, right? But there's also the moment when she's with her children and they're in the bedroom and she's thinking about the fact that, and this goes to my other point, that he could have stayed and infected their past, right? And I think that's the word that she used. But he left. And although he changed the present and the future by leaving, he was not able to change what was their love story from the past, right? For her, right? And for these children who have all of these memories about their parents and their home and their family life. In some ways, the going so quickly, although so shocking, was perhaps maybe the better thing to do, particularly under the circumstances where they were in COVID. I mean, I've thought about this a lot, right? It was very shocking. We hear this story all the time, but then you get to the end and you think, well, maybe that's right. Maybe she's still is in love with him, certainly was in love with the life that they had, right, together. I think that's the other point. And still had feelings for him. And that's an okay thing because they still have children together.
We've given her a hard time about all the things she did wrong. What did she do right in the process of this very quick divorce?
So what did she do right? I think she moved on, right? In a sense that she picked herself up. She took care of her children, right? She figured it out. She got her divorce done. She tried to put in her counterclaim. It didn't work. It made him angry. She ended up with both the homes weren't really something that she was supposed to end up with legally because of the prenuptial agreement. So she might have done something right along the way that she ended up with both those homes. The book doesn't really say why he decided to give it to her because there's a part where it says that she needed to buy him out and she couldn't afford to do so. But she does end up with both those homes and she ended up with child support, didn't get any alimony. I think that was part of the prenuptial agreement. But she got the vineyard and she got the apartment in the city and she was able to write this book.
And she
And
also,
look what she did.
well, and it's going to be a movie starring Gwyneth Paltrow, and
Look
we
what
have to
she
talk
did.
about that. Right. But she also mentioned something else she did, which she made sure that however it was, what their final agreements were, that she herself was financially independent from him.
Yes.
Yes.
So that she wasn't having to make decisions that he could weigh in on for
Yes.
herself.
Yes.
And I think that was actually quite important and a good move.
I
And
agree.
it was something that she said her lawyer helped her with. And I did want to hear from you on this, Lisa. Women, whether it's divorce or they're widowed, I have heard this many times where they haven't handled anything and they almost need to go to a boot camp to deal with the accounts, deal with all of these things. And it sounded like her lawyer had a process to help her with that. Is that what you do? I mean, you have all of these certifications. It sounds like you have to wear multiple hats.
Yeah. So we do try to think about what is the next step for a lot of the women who we become very close to. And one of the next steps, obviously, is to get them connected to a good financial advisor if they're going to have money to invest, if they're going to be living off that investment income, maybe to connect them with somebody in terms of career planning for them. Because if they've been out of the workforce for so long, career planning is actually really important. I'm not one of those attorneys who says, oh, you shouldn't work because then you won't get alimony. I don't really believe in that. I think that the financial independence is far more important than waiting for the check each month.
Yes.
So I think that that's really important. And, we do try to help them think about what the next step is and what they're going to do in terms of income and what happens when the child support is over or the alimony is over and how they're going to actually run their lives. And so, yes, these are absolutely discussions that we have with our clients very early on and all the way through.
Those are tough conversations to think that far in advance.
And
They
it's a
are.
big learning curve because they haven't done that and they're having to juggle all this other stuff. So there was another scene in the book. She claims her doctor said that her not working possibly made her less desirable.
I do
And
remember
that
that.
was her observation with patients who stopped working. So first of all, it's a memoir. That's her account of what happened. But is there truth in that? Stopping employment makes you not as desirable of a partner.
I think it depends on the partner, right? I think it depends on the partner. I think that, look, I've always worked. Okay. I've worked since I'm 19 years old. It's part of who I am as a human being. So I can't picture not working, frankly. But I think it depends. Do you have a partner who really does want, right, to have a stay-at-home parent and wife? My daughter is a stay-at-home mom and they have a very traditional marriage and yet they're in their 30s. And it's very important to her that she raise my grandson and that she be there. And and it's important, I think, to her husband as well. And I don't think that there's anything manipulative about it for either of them. I think that that's really what they've decided to do. But I think that you have to, again, you have to think about what are your safeguards if you're doing that. And I think that that's where, unfortunately, there wasn't the thought process for that, of what the safeguards were going to be.
So do you think Belle should have written this book from a perspective personally, professionally, and for her family?
So professionally, for sure, right? Okay. It's obviously a huge, huge hit. Everyone is talking about it. It's going to be a huge movie. I personally can't wait to see it.
Me too. We should
Right.
we should
Okay.
plan something.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. We could do a savvy ladies plan for
You know,
this. That would be like
awesome.
This
amazing,
might be
right?
better than the Barbie movie, which we did go
Yes.
see as an
Yes. This
event
could
for
be
us.
like a
But I
whole.
think this has more, merit for discussion. And, another thing, did she
Wait, we
get,
didn't get the answer about for the
sorry,
family.
go, go,
So
go.
so I think that um so I have mixed feelings about it for the family, right? Of what was the right thing to do, how the children will affect the children. But I think that because it's obvious that all the names, it doesn't matter that she changed everybody else, his name, et cetera. Everybody's going to know who he is. You just Google it, as she said, in about a minute and it's there. But I think she needed to do that. And I think that that's her skill set is writing. Talks about it in the book that she always wanted to do this. And so she took it and she did it and she's a success. And I think you have to give her a lot of credit. And I think and I know nobody here wants to give him credit, but I am going to give him some credit. He didn't block it. He did not block it.
Agreed.
And he could have blocked it knowing she was a writer in their settlement agreement. I mean, he could have made this very clear in the settlement agreement that this was to be confidential. And we see these confidentiality clauses. And I was waiting as I was reading the book to see like what happened with the confidentiality clause. Was it negotiated and all of that? And then, of course, you find out that she did this article in the New York Times and she sends it to him and he says, go for it, like basically. And a lot of credit to him. He clearly was able to live in his skin with it and he didn't block her. And because of it, she is going to be a huge success, and that's a big deal.
Well,
And as he said, she's going to be fine.
Yes.
and maybe there's an implication there that there is another side of the story, because obviously that's what most people are saying. But the thing I was going to ask earlier, which hinged upon your response, did she get permission from her children? And Maura and I think of this all the time when we do our programs, that it is not our right to give away information about our family. We can talk about ourselves, but it's not appropriate unless we get permission. Did her children say it's okay to tell the story because this will be their legacy?
So this will be part of their legacy, right? This will be part of their story, but it's not their legacy. It's not their entire legacy. There are other parts. My mom went on to write this really incredible book, okay? My mom had a great movie with Gwyneth Paltrow come out. My dad is a very successful person in a hedge fund, okay? There are so many parts to their legacy. Do I think if we were in the middle of a custody case that I would recommend this? No. So let's be clear, right? I would not, without permission from your spouse and without making sure that the entire family is on board. We are super careful about social media. We are super careful about what the posts are going to be and what you're writing and all of that. But the divorce was over, right? This was years later. It was definitely a story to be told because here we are all talking about it. And the legacy is that she took control of her life. And maybe she didn't ask. Maybe she just did what she needed to do. And you know what? Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's
And
okay.
that's
in
a
this
great
case.
message, that we need to take control of our lives.
Right.
Yes.
I have loved this discussion. I'm so glad we did it, and we are going to go to the movies together.
And we wanted to
talk
talk
some
about
more.
it for so long, to sit with you. And this gave us great material because it's a template for a story of what you want to avoid or how you can make your marriage better, actually, or more protected. And thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us.
Thank you so
today.
much. And thanks for being so patient. I've wanted to do this for a long time with both of you. So I'm really glad that we did it. And I'm thrilled that we did it about this. And yes, I think I'm going to organize a Savvy Ladies event for this movie premiere. I think it would be amazing.
The Paris Theater in the city, they do private showings.
Okay, so let's organize it. I'm gonna speak to the executive director, Judy Herbst and Stacy, and we're gonna see if we can do this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please follow us, listen to us, and rate us on our platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our website, thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and email us your suggestions. There's no cost, but it means a lot to us.